You may not realize it, but most of your life is lived in automatic reactions. A cold glance can ruin your entire afternoon. An unanswered message can keep you up all night. A single criticism can make you doubt yourself for weeks. You're not living, you're reacting. You don't own your mind, someone out there is running it for you. And the most frightening part, you've gotten used to it. We live in a noisy world, yet we ignore the one thing truly worth mastering, our own mind. The only thing that genuinely belongs to you is often the first thing you surrender to emotions, to circumstances, to other people. But the moment you pause, look within, and choose to respond instead of react, that is the moment you reclaim a forgotten power. This isn't abstract philosophy, it's a vital skill, and Stoicism is the tool you use to train it day by day. Begin with these 10 core principles. 1. The way you see the problem is the problem. There's a morning I'll never forget. I was in a rush, coffee in hand, phone ringing, a packed schedule ahead. Just as I stepped outside, the sky broke open, not a soft drizzle, but the kind of torrential rain that feels like the sky is angry. I stopped, frustrated, soaked from shoulders to shoes, coffee staining my white shirt, and suddenly everything felt like chaos. In that moment, I thought to myself, why is everything working against me today? Emotions surged like crashing waves, and I felt like the day was ruined before it even began. But then, on the train, I looked over at the man beside me, elderly, with a torn raincoat, shoes soaked through, arms wrapped around a battered bouquet of flowers. Though drenched, he sat still, his face calm, his eyes soft as if nothing was wrong. That moment made me feel small, not because I was weak, but because I let a simple situation dictate my entire attitude for the day. And him, with not a single advantage, remained composed, not because he was lucky, but because he saw things differently. I realized something clear. Same rain, same situation, yet completely different emotions. Not because the event was different, but because the perspective was. And from that moment, I understood what Marcus Aurelius once wrote in his journal, "It's not the world that hurts us, but how we interpret it. It's not the wind outside, but the storm we create inside that breaks us." We often believe emotions are uncontrollable, that anger or disappointment naturally follow events. But that's not true. Between an event and the emotion, there's always a gap. A moment so brief most people never notice. That's where you make the interpretation. You assume someone disrespected you. You believe something is wrong. You label it unfair, disrespectful, hurtful. And those labels, not the event, ignite your emotions. The Stoics called this judgment the mind's first impression. It can be your strength, or it can be your invisible chain. If you master the judgment, you master the response. You can choose calm in chaos. And if you can do that, no event can steal your inner stability. The lesson here isn't to suppress emotion. Stoicism doesn't tell you to smile when you're hurt or pretend everything's fine. It only asks you, question your assumptions before feeling your feelings. Pause and ask, am I sure this is true? Is there another angle? Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe this isn't as bad as I think. This practice isn't easy. At first, you'll fail often. You'll still get angry, still react. But over time, little by little, you'll start to notice the space between event and emotion growing wider. And in that space, you will find yourself again. You can't change the weather, other people, or the world. But you can always change how you see a situation. And when you do that, you change everything. Not because the world gets better, but because you've become strong enough to live in it. 2. What you believe determines how you feel. One day, I sent a long message to a friend, someone I believed was close. It wasn't a complaint or a demand, just an honest share after weeks of feeling distant. But I received no reply. One day passed, then 2, then 3. And in those days, I lived in an emotional fog, not because of what they did, but because of what I thought they were thinking about me. I began writing mental scripts. They must think I'm annoying. Maybe I was too sensitive. I guess I'm not as important as I thought. And with every assumption, it was like cutting into my own emotions. But what was the truth? I didn't know. I had no evidence. Just a silence, and I filled it with negativity. That's when I remembered something Seneca once said. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Every feeling you have doesn't come from the event, it comes from what you believe about the event. You're not angry because someone forgot to reply. You're angry because you believe that means they don't care. You're not sad because you were rejected. You're sad because you believe you're not worthy. You're not anxious about the meeting, you're anxious because you believe you'll fail. Here's the thing. Those beliefs are rarely verified. They come from old wounds, from a fear of abandonment, from a habit of pessimism, from pain that hasn't healed. They're emotional inheritance, and you assume they're true. But if you stop and ask, what am I believing right now, and am I sure it's true? You open a space to change how you feel. When you shift the belief underneath, the emotion that rides on top shifts too. Epictetus emphasized this. It's not the events themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. This is central to Stoic teaching. Emotions are not victims of circumstance. They are the results of your inner perception, and that means you have the power to change them. I don't live the way I used to anymore. These days, when a negative emotion overtakes me, I don't ask, why is this happening to me? I ask, what belief is making me feel this way? And usually, the answer leads me into a shadowed place where I still believe I'm not enough, not worthy, or unloved. But once I see that, I'm no longer a victim. I become someone who can choose a different belief. You can't stop others from acting irrationally. You can't control silence, rejection, or being ignored. But you can stop the harmful narrative running inside. You can refuse to follow the same mental path of, I must have done something wrong. They must hate me. And every time you do that, you're not just managing emotion, you're reshaping the way you show up in your own life. 3. Your mind can be a prison or a way out. There was a time in my life when going to work felt like suffocation. No one forced me. The job wasn't overwhelming. My co-workers were fine. The salary was enough. But every morning, dragging myself out of bed felt like going to war. A quiet voice in my head repeated, I'm stuck here. I don't have another choice. And that belief imprisoned me for nearly 3 years. Not the office, not the boss, my own mind. We tend to think freedom is external, quitting the job, taking a vacation, escaping obligations. But real freedom always starts from within. And the most terrifying kind of prison is the one built by the words you whisper to yourself, I can't. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, was once a slave. Yet he taught, your body may be bound, but if your mind is free, no one can imprison you. When I first read that, I froze, because I realized, even though I wasn't in chains, I was living like a prisoner. Not in shackles, but in unexamined thoughts. I'm not good enough. I have no options. This is the only life I get. The mind, if left undisciplined, builds its own cage. You'll be locked in self-doubt, fear of judgment, others' definitions of success, and past wounds that have shaped your limits. Every time you repeat a negative belief without challenging it, you weld another bar onto your mental cell. But that same mind, if you learn to observe it, can become your escape. Freedom doesn't mean fleeing reality. It means seeing clearly. What am I believing? Can I think differently? When I began changing how I spoke to myself from "I'm stuck" to "I'm here to learn," from "I can't" to "I haven't tried yet," from "I have no choice" to "I'm choosing this for my own reasons," I no longer felt trapped. Not because the world changed, but because I stepped out of the prison I had built for myself. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have the power to retreat into your own mind at any moment." That's not an invitation to escape, but a reminder that in every situation you can return inward, view things through reason rather than impulse, and from there, find a clearer way forward. If you feel stuck, don't rush to break down the door. First, check whether the lock is real or if you've simply forgotten that the key has been in your hand all along. 4. Most of what you fear will never happen. I used to wake up at 3 a.m., heart racing, palms cold, my mind spinning through a spiral of what's about to go wrong. An unanswered email, a tense meeting in the morning, a vague message from someone. Everything felt like a storm warning. I lay there, unable to sleep, imagining dozens of scenarios, my boss scolding me in front of everyone, the project collapsing, my reputation damaged, a relationship falling apart. But then, morning came, and none of it happened. The meeting went fine. The message was a misunderstanding. The email was handled in 5 minutes. No storm, no disaster, just a night lost battling an enemy that didn't exist. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Not because the world is cruel, but because the human mind is skilled at constructing tragedies that never happened. And the irony is, we believe them not because they're true, but because they seem possible. Possible is all it takes for the mind to latch on and amplify it into fear. Fear is an ancient reflex. It once protected our ancestors from predators, starvation, and death. But in today's world, where danger comes from an unread email instead of a lurking tiger, that same instinct becomes a burden. We can't tell the difference between real danger and imagined threat. So we live in a constant red alert, even when nothing's on fire. Stoicism doesn't teach us to deny fear. It teaches us to confront it with reason. When fear arises, don't panic. Don't run. Ask yourself, what are the actual odds this will happen? Then ask, if it does happen, what's the worst-case scenario, and how would I deal with it? Just by answering those questions honestly, fear begins to lose its grip. I've used this not once, but hundreds of times before giving a presentation, before sending out a job application, before ending an unhealthy relationship. Each time I wrote down what I feared most, followed by 3 lines. Will this actually happen? If it does, can I handle it? Have I survived worse before? And almost always, I realized I was overestimating the power of the worst-case scenario and underestimating my own ability to recover. The truth is, most fears are shadows. They have no teeth, no claws, no real power unless you let them grow in your mind. And if you're not careful, you'll spend your life running from something only to realize at the end, it never chased you. You don't need to eliminate fear. You just need to learn to see through it. And when you can do that, you don't just reclaim peace, you reclaim the authority over your life that should have always been yours. 5. Anxiety is a signal, not a truth. There was a time when I woke up every morning with a tightness in my chest. No specific reason, no stressful meeting awaiting, no crisis, just that feeling, vague exhausting, like my mind had run a marathon before my body even opened its eyes. And I called it by a familiar name: anxiety. At the time, I thought, something bad must be coming. This can't be for no reason. I let it lead me through the day, doubting people around me, suspicious of every little detail. And even though nothing went wrong, I went to bed in the same heightened state, like I had survived a battle no one else knew existed. But one day, sitting in a coffee shop, flipping through my notebook, I noticed something frightening. I had written about this anxious feeling almost every day for 3 months, yet none of the disasters I worried about ever actually happened. No one hated me. No crisis came. Nothing was wrong. It was just me living as if something always was. Anxiety, when misunderstood, convinces you it's a forecast. But the truth is, it's only a signal, not a fact. Like a fire alarm, sometimes it's smoke, but often it's just burnt toast. The warning is always worth paying attention to, but not always accurate. And if you treat every alarm like a real fire, you'll end up living in constant panic. In Stoicism, emotions aren't denied. Epictetus said, "We can't control the first impulse, but we can control the next response." Anxiety arrives as a first feeling born of your nervous system, old experiences, unresolved insecurity. But between feeling and belief, between belief and action, that's where your choice lives. One of the best ways I've learned to work with anxiety is to write it down. When I feel uneasy, I ask, what exactly am I anxious about? Then, is there any real evidence for this? And finally, if it does happen, am I capable of handling it? With each answer, the fear begins to fade. Not because I soothe it with blind optimism, but because I force my mind to use logic instead of following vague fear. Anxiety doesn't make you weak. It's simply a signal that something within you needs your attention. Maybe it's sleep deprivation. Maybe you've pushed too far. Maybe an old wound wants healing. But that doesn't mean the future is doomed, that you'll fail, or that everything's falling apart. It's just an alarm, not the truth. When you learn to treat anxiety as a signal, you make it a companion, not a tyrant. And that's the first step back to self-mastery. Not by shutting off your feelings, but by shining the light of reason into the quiet corners where fear hides. 6. Not changing is a quiet kind of pain. There's a kind of pain no one sees. It doesn't make you cry. It doesn't knock you down. It lingers quietly in tired mornings, meaningless evenings after work, sleepless nights with the haunting sense that you're living a life that isn't yours. That's the pain of not changing. I lived like that for nearly 2 years. Every workday felt like I was doing someone else's job. Every conversation felt half-hearted, every sleep restless, and still, I stayed. Because the job was stable, because I didn't want to start over, because I feared failure, because I thought this is just how everyone lives. Then, one day, I realized the scariest thing wasn't failing after change. It was succeeding at a life I didn't want. The price of stability was a version of myself locked in silence, in compromise, in a kind of dull pain I had grown too used to even notice. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Yet we delay change like tomorrow is always guaranteed. And while we wait for the perfect moment, we trade away our hours for routine, for the comfort zone, for the mindset of, at least it's not worse." Stoicism doesn't celebrate recklessness or impulsiveness, but it does demand one thing. You cannot live with dignity if you accept stagnation. And stagnation doesn't just dull your life, it slowly erodes your character. Every time you say, "I'll change, but not today," You teach yourself that fear is stronger than your ideals. We wait for shocks, for turning points, for breakdowns to force us into change. But real change starts with awareness, with the moment you can no longer pretend that everything is fine. You don't need things to fall apart. You just need to listen to the smallest sigh inside the one that's quietly begging for a more honest life. I didn't leave my job because I hated it. I left because I knew one more year and I'd lose the best part of myself, the part that still asks questions, still longs to grow, still wants to live with meaning. And what made me leave wasn't courage. It was the realization that if I didn't change, I'd keep hurting silently and endlessly. You don't need to change everything in a day, but you can start by no longer lying to yourself. That everything's okay, that I'll just deal with it, that it's not worth it. If your heart keeps sending signals that something is wrong, don't cover your ears. Listen, because maybe. It's not dissatisfaction, it's an invitation to become the truer version of who you are. 7. Control what's in your hands. Let go of the rest. I once spent months just asking myself, why don't they like me? A colleague avoided me in meetings. A longtime friend became distant. I analyzed every word I had said, every move I had made, like someone trying to decode an invisible verdict. But there was no clear answer. And the only thing I knew for sure was this. I was slowly losing my inner peace over something I couldn't control. We grow up with the illusion that if we're good enough, kind enough, try hard enough, then people will treat us fairly. Life will be smoother. Things will go as planned. But reality doesn't work that way. Good people are still misunderstood. Kind people are still mistreated. And life rarely follows our script. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You always have the option of having no opinion, and if you have no opinion, you suffer no harm." That line stunned me, because we often believe we're obligated to respond, obligated to care, obligated to think about everything happening around us. But the truth is, some things happen not for us to control, but for us to learn to release. In Stoic philosophy, the world is divided into two spheres: what you can control and what you can't. What you can control is very little: your thoughts, your words, your actions, your values. The rest, what others think, the weather, the market, who loves you, who leaves you, all lie outside your control. The paradox is, the things you can't control are usually what cause most of your emotional pain. You lose sleep over a text not returned. You grow resentful because someone won't change. You feel hurt because the world is unfair, and you don't realize you're pouring your mind, emotions, and energy into things you never owned in the first place. I used to be like that, until I started writing a simple list each morning. What can I control today? And the answer was always clear. What I say, how I listen, the attitude I bring, the values I refuse to abandon. When I live fully in those things, everything else feels lighter, not because the world changed, but because I no longer use the world as the measure of my peace. There is a strange kind of power in letting go of the right things. It doesn't make you weaker, it makes you free. Free from expectations, from disappointment, from trying to control a universe that was never built to obey you. And the miracle is, when you focus on what you can control, you do it better, think more clearly, and feel stronger because you're no longer scattered across 1,000 things beyond your reach. Life may be chaotic, but if you remain clear with yourself, if you know what's truly in your hands, then you've already won. Not by conquering the world, but by refusing to let the world conquer your mind. 8. Action heals doubt. There were mornings I sat silently by a cooling cup of coffee, staring at a long to-do list on my screen and not knowing where to start. I wasn't lazy, I didn't lack time. I just doubted myself, my abilities, the point of it all. I asked, am I on the right path? Does anyone care about what I'm doing? What if I fail? And so I sat there doing nothing. Just thinking, then overthinking, then spiraling. That paralysis didn't come from exhaustion. It came from a mind tangled in questions with no answers. And the longer I sat, the more I analyzed, the more I disconnected from the only thing that could pull me out of it. Action. Seneca once wrote, "We often suffer more from things we haven't started than from those we've done." There's truth in that line, because doubt is never resolved through theory. You can write pros and cons all day. You can ask friends for advice, read another book, wait for inspiration to strike. But most of it is just procrastination disguised as preparation. Meanwhile, the moment you begin even just one small step, your mind shifts. The paralysis fades, your body warms up, your focus sharpens. Because action generates a kind of energy that thought alone never can. When you act, you're no longer in the realm of imagination. You're in reality. And reality, even messy, even imperfect, is always stronger than vague fears in your head. I remember once needing to write an important speech. I delayed it for nearly a week, worried it wouldn't be good enough, deep enough. But on the deadline day, I forced myself to open the laptop and write. Just the first 10 minutes. No pressure. Just to begin. And something strange happened. As my fingers touched the keyboard, all the doubts started giving way to flow. I wasn't uncertain anymore. I was doing. And the doing, even if not perfect, was enough to silence all the voices holding me back. Epictetus taught, "Don't ask a person what he thinks, watch what he does." But more importantly, don't ask yourself too much about what you think, observe what you're avoiding. Because where you procrastinate is also where you doubt yourself the most. Action doesn't have to be grand. You don't need to write the whole book, just a paragraph. You don't need to run 10 kilometers. Just put on your shoes and step outside. You don't need to fix every issue in the relationship. Just start one honest conversation. These small steps, unglamorous, imperfect, are the cure for the doubt you carry. Because you can't think your way out of paralysis. You have to move your way out. And every time you do, no matter how small, you're not just getting closer to your goal, you're sending a message to yourself. I can. There is no affirmation more powerful than that. Not in words, in action. 9. You are what you repeat. Every day. You don't become insecure because of one insult. You don't become resilient from one inspiring lesson. And you don't lose yourself from one lazy day. No, those things alone aren't strong enough to change you. But if they happen often enough, repeat long enough, they slowly carve themselves into you not as scars, but as part of your identity. Aristotle once said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. That quote sounds simple, but if you really sit down and examine a single day of your life, you'll see everything you do, no matter how small or trivial, is adding up, building you or slowly breaking you. I used to start my mornings checking my phone. Not for work, just to scroll through what others were doing. News, Instagram, a few TikTok videos. Not much, just 15-20 minutes. But those first minutes planted something dangerous. A mind led from the outside. And by the time I walked out the door, I was no longer in charge of my life. We like to think we're shaped by ideals, goals, and noble dreams. But in truth, we're shaped by the tiniest things. What time you wake up, what you read each morning, what you say to yourself in the mirror, how you react when tired, angry, or rejected. These things invisible to others are what build or erode your inner strength. Marcus Aurelius wasn't a philosopher king because he had deep thoughts. He became one because he repeated those thoughts daily. His Meditations wasn't written for publication, it was a private journal. Notes he wrote to himself to live rightly, consciously, and with virtue. It was the repetition, the writing, reflecting, correcting that made him one of the most disciplined and luminous minds in history. You don't have to be great every day, but you must repeat the right things even when no one applauds, even when there's no immediate result, because you are not built in grand moments. You are shaped in ordinary hours when you choose what's good over what's easy, focus over distraction, patience over reaction. And if today you don't like the person you're becoming, stop looking at your personality or destiny. Look at your daily routine. See what you're repeating. That's where you're silently becoming who you are, whether you realize it or not. Because in the end, you are not what you dream. You are what you do day after day. And if you want to become calmer, stronger, wiser, you don't need to do anything grand. Just start repeating what's right today. Then do it again tomorrow, then again, until the person you are no longer needs to try to live rightly because you've become that person already. 10. Complaining is the practice of the one who has given up. I once had a colleague, very competent, who started every workday with a long rant. How awful the company was, how annoying the clients were, how unreasonable the deadlines were. At first, I sympathized. But day after day, year after year, I realized he wasn't venting. He was practicing the daily practice of someone quietly giving up. Complaining is a behavior we assume is harmless, a slip of the tongue, a bit of stress relief. But if you look closely, you'll notice those who complain the most are often those who change the least. And those who change the least are often the ones who have silently given up. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer not from the events themselves, but from our interpretation of them." Complaining doesn't change reality. It's simply a declaration. I refuse to take responsibility for this. And when you repeat that declaration enough times, you're no longer just talking about your circumstances, you're reprogramming your mind to believe that you're no longer in control. There's a common thread between those who go far in life and those who remain stuck. The first may be in equally bad conditions, but they don't stay there long because they don't waste time complaining. They either accept the situation and do their best, or they walk away and take action. But they don't sit around repeating a blame narrative. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, if something happens by nature or fate, embrace it. If it's caused by others, adjust yourself to respond rightly. If it's your own doing, then change it immediately. Where in any of that, is there room for complaining? There isn't. Because every situation is an opportunity to practice, not an excuse to grumble. Complaining has a strange pull. It makes you feel right, like a victim, like you have a reason not to act. It creates momentary sympathy with others who are also stuck. But once you've finished talking, whining, blaming what's actually changed, nothing except that you've surrendered a bit more of your inner strength. I remember the first time I realized I'd fallen into this trap. It was a Monday, work piling up, and I called a friend to vent, but instead of nodding along, he asked, "So what are you doing to fix it?" I went silent, because I hadn't done anything. I was just complaining to justify not starting. And that question, blunt, cold, perfectly timed, brought me back to my responsibility. From that day on, I set a rule. Every time I wanted to complain, I had to act first. Even just a small step, an email, a phone call, a change of plan. And I realized, when you're doing something, you don't have time to complain. When you're busy improving yourself, you lose interest in blaming others. Complaining is the exercise of someone who has stopped trying but hasn't yet found the courage to walk away. But action, even small, is the declaration. I'm still here. I haven't given up. I will not surrender just because things are hard. And if you feel like your life is stuck, maybe you don't need more advice. Maybe you just need to stop complaining for one day and instead start doing something, anything, to get yourself out of where you are. I used to think life would change when I found the right opportunity, the right mentor, or a dramatic turning point. But after many years and many breakdowns, I realized life only changes when I begin to change myself bit by bit, every day. Not through grand decisions, but through disciplining the mind, facing my fears, choosing silence in anger, and doing the work even when no one sees it. I no longer look for a secret. I simply observe the habits I repeat. I no longer blame others for not changing. I just ask, today did I live according to what I believe in? And when I can answer that question through action rather than words, I know I'm on the right path, even if that path is far from easy. If something in this video spoke to a part of you, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next one. Because each of us, if brave enough to look within, can be reborn from even the most ordinary things. And that is the true path of a free mind. I'll see you in the next video.